Well, it is good to see you in this place, and I'm just glad that other folks get to join us while we're together in the place. First thing we need to do is give a shout out to Miss Hilda Brown, because Miss Hilda celebrated a 90th birthday this week. There you go. Looking forward to about 90 more. Ought to be a good thing along the way. And so if you got your Bible with you today and would turn with us to the Psalms, Psalm 46, pretty familiar with the first couple of verses, then maybe some of the verses not so familiar, and then there's some familiar verses toward the end of the passage. Over these past weeks we have been adjusting to a new way of life. The pendulum swung and swung over to a place we've not lived before. We have had to learn how to do some things differently. It has been more of a radical adjustment for some folks than for others. Hard for me to imagine what it would be like to have someone who's in the nursing home right now and you not be allowed to be there, to be able to visit with a family member, somebody that's there. It's so hard to imagine how confusing it must be for those folks who are there when their family can't get to be with them and be there. That's a radical change that some folks have had to adjust to. Those people who, we've had people, if you go to the hospital for surgery, you go by yourself. Nobody can go in, even in testing and things like that. That's a pretty radical shift. If you've been used to being with a spouse and have been together for 50 years and now that spouse goes in for some kind of procedure and you can't be there, that's a kind of a new adjustment. There's a new sense of being isolated. We're separated from each other. Man, when's the last time you had a good hug from somebody that wasn't somebody already infected by you because they're part of your family? And so it's just, it's a new world in some ways. And hopefully we're beginning to see the pendulum swing back to the direction from which it originally came. And hopefully over time we'll get back to a place. And even that, there's some unsettledness in the whole process. We don't know. We don't know what to expect. We didn't know how far it was going to swing on one hand. We don't know how far it's going to swing back on the other. It's just an unsettling time for lots of folks. There's some angst and anxiety, maybe some apprehension. And you may not be one of those people. Maybe you're one of those people that you're just set, secure for whatever happens and you're just ready to go. And if you are, just be sensitive to the ones who aren't. We're not all at the same place at the same time because we're not all just alike. God could have made us that way, just cookie cutter, but He didn't do it that way. We're all different and unique. That makes the mixed batch of cookies a whole lot better. And so wherever you are in that process, just realize that there are other people who aren't at that place, and it's okay. You be where you need to be and we'll trust them. But in the midst of all that, we all have some of the same basic needs. We need to know that we are safe and secure in the everlasting arms of Jesus Christ. There's not anything about any of this that's out of the ordinary for Him, caught Him by surprise. And so some of the truths in Psalm 46 would help us to get there. Truths about who God is and the way He benefits our lives, especially in times when there's a lot of change. So let's read these verses together from Psalm 46, and then we'll talk about 4 truths that come right out of that. First verse, Psalm 46, God is our refuge and our strength. He is a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth should change, though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations made an uproar, the kingdoms tottered. He raised His voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has wrought desolations in the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. Then there's a familiar verse. Cease striving and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. The good news for us is this from the passage. We're going to look at 4 basic truths, so just kind of an introduction here. The good news for us is the starting place for every aspect of life for us is God. We begin with an advantage that some people don't have. We begin, no matter what it is we're going to deal with, no matter what confronts us, what our circumstances, what our situation, as followers of Jesus Christ, we always start at the perspective that God is. That no matter what else is that we think He is, and He's the foundation. He is that ever-existing God. We can know Him, we can relate to Him, and He is here for us. He walks with us in the midst of whatever we walk through. We never walk alone because He is. He is our, it says God is our refuge. He's not exclusive to only a few. I'm glad that He's not only this God of refuge to the Methodist Church. I'm glad He's not only to those who are Americans. I'm grateful that He's available, and He's not just for a select few. Every person in the world has the opportunity to be so connected with God that they can experience the beginning place of God is. And so the good news is that through Jesus Christ, every person has the opportunity. And we would assume, we'd like to think that everybody in our community has that connection, but not everybody does. And the sad part about that is there are people who think they have the connection, who in fact don't have that connection. And had God's desire, He was not exclusivity, His desire was that every one of us would have a relationship. And so Jesus Christ came at the perfect time, at the perfect place, and He bore the sins of every person on the cross, paid the penalty, so that sins could be done away with, so that men might have access to God. And through Jesus Christ, every person has that access. And when we are connected to the Lord God, then we get the benefits of being connected with Him. And that's what this psalm is about. The better we know Him, the better we can live in what He has to offer us. So I want to talk about four truths. Each one of them has a word with the letter R in it. Obviously, the first one is refuge. He is our refuge. In the midst of whatever happens around us, no matter unsettling times or not, whether we've been in a situation we've been in forever today, the Lord God is a refuge for us in the midst of that. He is a place of safety and security and protection. Usually when we think about refuges today, we might think of a wildlife refuge or something like that, where you have an area that's sectioned off and set aside, and in that place animals are protected or plants are protected, can't be touched, can't be harmed, can't be bothered in any way. That's a refuge. In the Old Testament, there were cities of refuge. There were specific areas in the Promised Land that were set aside for the protection of those who committed some offense, and before they might be chased down by the accuser of the family in which the offense was committed, they had a place they could find refuge. They could find safety and security. They could go to a place and they would be protected. They wouldn't be touched. They wouldn't be harmed. They wouldn't be bothered in any way. But this passage says this: God Himself is our refuge. He is our refuge. Our refuge is a person, it's not a place. If our refuge was a place, like a wildlife refuge or like a city of refuge, then we'd actually have to, every time we needed protection or safety, we'd have to actually go to a locale. We might find ourselves living in that place. We might not ever be able to leave that place because of the need for safety and security. Well, it might be in our house. We might have to just live in our houses for the rest of our life. But because our refuge is not a place, it's a person, then wherever the person is, then we find refuge. And the good news with us is that God's everywhere. There's not a place that we can go to where we do not have refuge. There's no circumstance that we can walk through where He's not there to be our refuge. There's nothing that we deal with in life where He's not already there. He gets there before we do because He's already there. And so in every situation, every circumstance in life, He is our refuge. He is that place where we experience safety and security and protection. We are not able to be touched. We're not able to be harmed, and we cannot be bothered in any way. And so that's good news for us. And God delights to be able to be the refuge for us. And the Bible is full of examples of where God just shows up and He's a refuge. Daniel spent a night with some lions, had probably one of the best night's sleep he'd ever had because he was in a refuge in the midst of a lion's den. You know, God could have delivered him and not kept him out of the den, just like He could have kept those guys out of the furnace, but He didn't. He just chose to be a refuge with them where they were. And it lets us know, listen, if God can be a refuge to a man who spends the night with some lions, and if God can be a refuge to some young men who are going through a furnace of fire and they're not destroyed, then God can pretty much refuge us from anything. There's not anything that's too difficult for Him to be that place of refuge. And so we delight in that. We rejoice in that. I think of that example of Elisha. Elisha he was a pretty godly prophet in his day, and well, for any day for that matter. And there was an occasion where he kept telling the king of Israel all the actions of the king of Aram. The Arameans wanted to attack Israel, but every time they'd come down, God had warned them through Elisha. So finally the king of Aram decided he'd get rid of Elisha. And so he sent his armies over there, and they camped out around Elisha in his house. And Elisha's servant got a little nervous when he saw all those folks kind of gathered around. He didn't realize that he was in a refuge. He didn't realize that in the presence of an almighty God who's at work in their lives, that He's in a refuge. It doesn't matter what you see around you as long as you see the refuge. And so God said, Elisha asked God to open his eyes. He opened his eyes. He saw all these chariots of fire that were camped out around him. Realized how safe and secure he was from all alarms. And so we need to realize that He is our refuge. He is everything that we need in difficult times in life. In the midst of a pandemic, He's a refuge. But also in the daily routine of life, He's my refuge. I don't have to wait for a catastrophe to enjoy the fact that He's my refuge. In fact, every day is an opportunity for me to take refuge in Him. He desires that. He desires that. He longs for it. He doesn't want me to wait to get to the place where I'm in a desperate situation. He didn't want me to get to the end of my rope before I cry out to Him to be a refuge. He wants me to walk with Him in that place every day. A refuge is only good if it's utilized. He can be the greatest refuge there ever is, and more than we've ever understood, more than we could ever understand and been a refuge. But unless we're able to utilize Him as a refuge, then it really doesn't do us any good to have a refuge. He is all we need in my circumstances, my situation. But in order for Him to be my refuge, there are some things I do. I take refuge in Him. Psalmist would over and over again, Psalmist dealt with a lot of enemies in his life, and he understood his need for a refuge. He would say things like, "In the Lord I take refuge." That was an action on his part. It was a need of the moment. He took refuge. He personally and purposefully sought the place of being with God in such a way that God was his safety and his security. We come to Him. He is Psalm 18 verse 30. He is a shield to those who take refuge in Him. So the key is not just to know that I've got a refuge. The key is to actually take refuge. How do I do that? A couple of things. I come to Him and walk with Him. If He is my refuge, then I've got to be with Him where He is. I've got to be in the midst of, I've got to be seeking after His presence. It's not enough just to know that He is everywhere at all times, that He's omnipotent. I want to live at the place where I'm experiencing His presence in real ways all through the day. That it's more than just a relationship of convenience, that it's a relationship of cruciality, in the now. In the now, I am seeking Him. Not just necessarily to be my refuge, I'm just seeking Him for who He is. But in the process, I get Him as a refuge. He benefits my life. And so I take refuge in Him by coming to Him. Don't presume upon God. Don't just assume that because God is a refuge, that He's automatically going to refuge me. No, He's going to refuge me when I take refuge. And I take refuge by coming to Him. I call out to Him. That's the second time. Not only do I come to Him, but I call out to Him. So you find verses like Psalm 18, verses 2, 3, and 6. We'll talk about crying out to God or calling out to God and why that's important. Because when we call out to God, we're declaring our dependence on God. When I invite God and I cry out to Him and say, God, You're my only hope, You're my only plea, I need You. It's a cry of dependence. So, for example, in Psalm 18, verses 2, 3, and 6, the Lord is my rock and my fortress. He is my deliverer. My God, my rock in whom I take refuge. See, I take refuge. He is my shield, the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. I call, He saves. Now, can He call without me? Could He save without me calling? And He may very well do that. But if I call to Him, He delights to be able to respond to that. That call of dependence, that cry of dependence. Verse 6, in my distress I called upon the Lord and cried to my God for help. He heard my voice out of His temple, and my cry for help before Him came into His ears. God responds to the calls and the cries of His children. We need to be people who are continuously crying out to God. And we listen. And He's not like an insurance policy. We're not saving Him up for something big. We're crying out to God for every aspect of life. Even what we would consider to be little things. It would have been a good thing if Samson had cried out to the Lord before he decided to marry Delilah. He might have gotten a different perspective on life. He might have been able to see some things he didn't get to see at the end of life. And so we need to know there are no little things in life. And then finally, so we cry. How about Psalm 107? You need to jot these verses down. Psalm 107 is recounting the history of Israel. and how they came out of Egypt, and they were going through the wilderness in the promised land. And he'll tell them about, he says, they wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. This is verse 4, Psalm 107 verse 4. They wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They did not find a way to an inhabited city. They were hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. I can tell you, they need a refuge. They need somebody who's going to give them security and safety so that their needs are being met. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them out of their distresses. If you go down to verse 13, same thing. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He saved them out of their distresses. Verse 19, they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He saved them out of their distresses. You see the pattern? They cried out, and God delivered. They cried out and God delivered. They were allowing Him to be the refuge that He wants to be. I trust Him. I not only call out to Him, but I actively trust Him. He is, and I base that on the promises of God. Psalm 91:15, He will call. God says, He will call and I will answer. When you call, God answers. Isn't it to be amazing that there are lots of people you can call that won't take your call? I mean, I have that trouble all the time. People find out who it is and they just don't. I think they just don't take it. I don't know that. Maybe they're phone. But isn't it amazing that God never declines your call? He's never too busy. He's never on another line. He's never dealing with something else that's more important than what you're dealing with. He's waiting for you to call. God says this, you will call and I will answer. That's a pretty good promise to walk in. And so but we got to live in the promise. Just because He said it doesn't make it so. We've got to act on what He says. Psalm 50 verse 15. He will call upon me and I will rescue you. And he says in this passage that one of the good things about it, if we will take refuge in Him, we will have no fear. Therefore, verse 2 says, we will not fear. Now, here's what it is. It's not saying that you'll never experience the feeling of fear. It's saying that you'll never have to be controlled by that fear. No matter what may happen around you, what your circumstance, what your situation, if you will trust the Lord and you will pursue Him and take refuge in Him, He will deliver you from that overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety. He'll keep you from being controlled. He will keep you from being under the influence. He will not allow that fear to influence in real ways. And so we need to realize, in fact, he says in verse 2 that life around you may radically change. I mean, listen what he says, the earth will change. He says the mountains would slip into the heart of the sea. Now, I don't know about you, but if I heard on the news one day that some mountains had there had been an earthquake or whatever, and all of a sudden they just slipped off, Stone Mountain just disappeared down to the beach at Tybee. I mean, that'd be pretty drastic. I might be a little concerned about what else might be going on. He says, even if something very radical happens, some change, we don't like change because change always requires us to make some adjustments. And there's always a fear, what could happen next. And so he says, even if something is so radical that you can't even understand it or appreciate it were to happen, in the midst of that, you don't need to fear when God is your refuge. Can I tell you how you'll know it's true? You'll trust Him so that when that time comes, you'll know it's true. We don't wait till it happens and then decide, maybe No, you trust Him in the here and now and you walk that through. And when you get to that place, you'll just continue to trust Him. Change is a part of life. There's no greater protection in our lives than God being a refuge. When God is my refuge, there's not anyone or anything that can touch me. In the mid-1750s, our country was involved with a little skirmish. There was some fighting that took place for control of some of the inward areas around the colonies. And the French and the British were fighting. And so the Indians joined up with the French forces and the American colonists joined up with the British. In 1755, General Edward Braddock arrived here in the colonies and he brought with him 2 regiments of troops. And his mission was to expel the French from the Ohio River territory. So soon after he got here, he had heard before he got here and was interested in a young 23-year-old leader in the American militia whose name was George Washington. And so when he got here, he connected with George Washington, got him assigned, and George Washington and 100 of the Virginia buckskins were connected to General Braddock and his 2 regiments of troops to go on this mission. In May of 1755, they marched toward the French fort, Fort Duquesne, which is now in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When they were only a few miles away, they were attacked by these rebel forces, by the French and Indians. And in those days, the British warfare was they lined up in a straight line in their bright red outfits, and they just stood there with the weapons and on fire. They all fired. And they were just kind of out in the open. And unfortunately, the French and Indians didn't fight that way. They were hiding behind trees and different stuff. There was an ambush. And immediately, the British forces were just being slaughtered. In fact, within a very short time, every officer, every mounted officer was shot, except for one, George Washington. In that battle, he had 2 horses shot out from under him. And when the battle was over, he got to examine his uniform. He had 4 bullet holes in his uniform, but he was not shot. And the interesting thing was that the French and the Indians had specifically said they target the officers. If we can destroy the officers and the rest of the men, they won't know what to do. They'll fall apart. And that's what they did. And they shot all the officers except for George Washington. General Braddock himself was shot. Washington assumed leadership, and they made a hasty retreat. It felt like that was the wisdom of the day. When he got back, George Washington wrote a letter to his mom and his brother. And here's one of the things he said in his letter. By miraculous care of providence, I have been protected beyond human probability or expectation. What he's saying is this: by the hand of God, I have been protected. There was an Indian chief in that battle. His name was Red Hawk. And he personally shot at George Washington 11 times. And his gun, he was so accurate, his gun was named the gun that cannot miss. And after 11 direct shots at Washington, he said they just ceased to shoot. There was no need to shoot at him. He couldn't be hit. A little later on, after the war was over, in the middle 1770s, George Washington took an expeditionary force back to the same area. And while they were there, they were doing some exploring and things like that. A group of Indians stepped out of the woods. And one of those was the chief that had been in that battle that day. And this Indian chief spoke to him and he said, you know, I commanded all my braves to aim at you in that battle, but we realized early on it was all in vain, so we stopped shooting at you. And here's what the Indian chief said: seeing you were under the guardianship of the Great Spirit, we immediately ceased to fire at you. I have come to pay homage to the man who is the particular favorite of heaven and who can never die in battle. That's refuge. Can I tell you that you can be that man? You don't have to be George Washington to be that person. You just be the person who's willing to take refuge in God in the midst of whatever. If nothing else, these days, these circumstances of today are giving us a chance to practice taking refuge. And so we want to be at that place where we just learn how to be in refuge. So God is our refuge. Secondly, God reigns. God reigns. And in the next verses in this passage it says that there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling places. God is in the midst of her. So it's a picture of heaven. And that's where the throne room is. And that river that flows, it flows out from underneath the throne of God. And so the picture here is that God reigning. And one of the reasons why we can take comfort in knowing He's our refuge is because He's sovereign and in control. He reigns. There's not anything that He's not able to do. There's not anything. Every situation, every circumstance, everything in this world at this moment are under His direct control except you. You and I, and ultimately we really are under His control anyway. We are under it. But we get a choice in some of these. And so what we want to learn how to do is this, is that not anything catches Him off guard or by surprise. He's never at a loss for what He wants to do. There's never an action that when He chooses to do it, that He can't perform it. He reigns. He rules. He reigns. Verse 6 says he handles kingdoms. Nations make an uproar. The kingdoms totter. He can conquer. He destroys. He lifts up one, puts down another. He can use heathens to accomplish His plan, His purpose, and His will. He says in verse 8 that He brings desolations on the earth. Verse 9 says that He's bigger than any war is. He can start wars and stop wars just like that. He's an awesome God. Not only is He a place to provide me with safety, security, and protection, but He also is at work in every other aspect of my life on my behalf to accomplish His perfect plan, His perfect will. And I can rest in that. He can handle anything that I face. It doesn't matter what it is. God's bigger, and God can handle, and God wants to handle. It is foolish for me not to let Him reign in me. Here again, it's like taking refuge. It doesn't happen automatically because I know that He's a refuge. He doesn't reign in my life automatically because I know He does. It's because I choose to yield to Him. I choose to moment by moment yield and surrender. There's a willful yielding of my life. There's a willing waiting upon Him. There's a willing obedience in all aspects of life. There's that walk with Him, that surrender. And when He reigns, there's a throne room in my heart and that He and I are always wrestling for. I want to be on the throne in that room, but I also know that He needs to be on the throne. And there's only room for one on the throne. And every day I'm choosing who's going to be in control, who's going to be on the throne of my life. And that's His desire. He wants to be that for me in real ways. The third thing we need to realize, not only is He a refuge, and not only does He reign, He reveals Himself. In the midst of these circumstances, we get a chance to see God in ways we might not otherwise see. In the midst of some of the difficult things that you and I are walking through now that we wouldn't have chosen for ourselves, and we'd like for it to be over, and we'd like to be back to normal, it may be that we're going to experience some things with God in the here and now, these circumstances, we would not experience any other way. Would it be worth it? Would you be willing to walk through what you've had to walk through in order to get to know God in a way you might not have known Him otherwise? To experience His reality. And He wants to do that. He wants to. We never face anything alone. 3 different times in this passage in 46 He says that. In verse 5, God is in the midst of her. Verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. Verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. He reveals Himself. It sometimes may feel like we're in isolation because we have to shelter in place. The truth of the matter is, we're never sheltered in place from Him. He's always available. He's always there for us. He's always making Himself known. In fact, verse 1 says He's a very present help in times of trouble. Anytime there's trouble, He's there to help. It's not like I can wear Him out. It's not like I've got a quota of help, and once I get to the end of my quota, that's it, I'm on my own. No, He's abundantly available. There will never be a time in the midst of whatever I deal with, He's not sufficient to meet that need. And He's there. That's the amazing thing. He doesn't just hand it to me and say, here, take this and do the best you can. I got to put up a pool this week. You know, they don't make instructions for things anymore. They just give you pictures. And you're trying to figure out what does that picture mean and what part is that and stuff like that. Aren't you glad God doesn't do us that way? Of course, if I'd had words that probably in Chinese, wouldn't help me out much either. Look like pictures. But aren't you glad God doesn't do that? He reveals Himself in ways that we can know that it's Him, and He delights to do that. And in the midst of whatever we're dealing with, here's what, it gets our focus from off of whatever it is we're dealing with. It gets our focus on the Lord God who wants to make Himself known. Psalm 31:20, you hide them, those people who seek refuge in you, you hide them in the secret place of your presence. Do you know that God has a secret place in His presence? It's that place where He keeps His special treasure. That's where He wants to keep us. He wants us to be a people who are abiding as His special treasure in that place that brings Him great delight so that He can reveal more of Himself to us in those ways. And then finally, the fourth truth I see in this passage that will help us in the midst of whatever it is we deal with difficult is that, we talked about Him being a refuge. We talked about He reigns. We talked about that He reveals. The fourth one is what we do. We rest. That's a pretty good deal, isn't it? We rest. He says this, cease striving and know that I am God. Let go, relax, stop doing all this stuff. Most of the stuff we do on our own, apart from God, stirs stuff up rather than letting things settle down. We tend to make things a lot worse. If we would do nothing, things would be better. If God didn't do anything, we just stopped doing what we do, life would be better. And so what's what this verse says? Let's rest. That's the opposite of our natural inclinations. We want to do something. And God may be saying, there's nothing. I don't need you to do anything. I need you to wait. I need you to rest. I need you to just find your sufficiency in me. I need you to yield to my sovereignty. I need you to pursue and let me be your refuge. It's the opposite. I've told you this story before, and I guess it's because it's so vivid I thought I was going to lose my life. First time I learned how to water ski back in the day. I was never very athletic, still not very athletic. I learned water ski. And they go through this whole litany. My friend's taking me out, and they did a good job. They go through the whole litany of things, do this, don't do that, stuff. And one of the rules was, if you fall, well, they should have said if you fall, but when you fall, the first thing you do is let go of the rope. How many of you have heard that along the way? How many of you, first time you skied, you forgot the rule and you got to know, yeah, you know, and so you fall down. It's hard to let go of the rope. I don't know why that is. It just is. Naturally, we want to hold on to something. But if you hold on to the rope, you'll drink a lot of lake water. And so you just want to undo it. I understand when you're drowning. If you're drowning and somebody comes to rescue, comes to help, the best thing you can do is stop. Stop striving. Relax. Let go. Let this person who hopefully knows more than you do be able to rescue. But it goes against our nature. We fight. We want to do anything but let go. And that's the very thing we're asked to do. When you're learning to ride a bicycle, back in those days when you learn riding, you always had, I don't know about you, but usually you have somebody at some point in time that's kind of holding on to that thing, kind of helping you along the way. And you don't want them to let go. But you know, they need to let go. You never learn how to ride if they don't let go. And so that's the way it is in life. We need to learn how to do what 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your cares on Him. We need to give it over to Him. We need to let go and quit trying to work things out on our own and let Him take those things. You know, we need to let go of trying to be in control. You know, if you have an automobile, and hopefully some of you do, whoever's behind the steering wheel usually is in control. Now, if you have people riding to the back seat and they're reaching over the front seat and got hands on the steering wheel, you may get to where you want to go, but it won't be a whole lot of fun. You know, steering wheel really is only designed for one person. One person in control. And that's kind of like our life is like that. We're really only designed for one person to be in control. And sometimes the problem I have in life is I've got my hands on the steering wheel. God's trying to have a hand on the steering wheel, but I've got mine, and I just need to learn how to let go. In fact, you know what? In that scenario, God really just wants me to get in the back seat and let Him drive. And it goes against my nature. That's not the way my nature starts out. But I can learn how to be at that place. He says there will be two results if we'll do that. He says the first one is, I will know Him as God. Cease striving and know that I am God. You want to know God as God? It's going to require some letting go. God will be God when we let go and let Him be God. And then the second, so we get benefit. The second thing is the world gets to see Him being exalted. He says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. You know, is it a good thing for God to be exalted? I mean, is it a good thing for the world around us to see God as God? To see some things happen that only God can do? Like kind of like this chief of Washington, he says, you know, we realized early on, and the Great Spirit is protecting you. It's foolish for us to go against the Great Spirit. They may not understand it, can explain it, but they knew something was going on. There was something happening that was supernatural. Can I tell you, the world around us needs to see that. They need to experience this God we talk about. Well, one of the ways they will is when we learn how to let go, cease striving, let God be the refuge He wants to be, let Him rule and reign in our hearts like He wants to rule and reign, let Him reveal Himself to us in very special ways, hide us in that secret place of His person so that we get to know Him intimately and be able to just rest. You know, the world around us, there's a lot of striving going on in people's lives, people trying to make sense of everything, people trying to hold things together, people trying to decide what to do, what not to do, people just anxious about this and anxious about that, what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there. They don't have the rest that you and I have in Jesus Christ. We need to be that rest so they would at least get a taste of what it's like. So the good news is this. What a great opportunity for God to let us practice the truths of this passage. From here on, we've got some good times to do that. So let's put it into practice. See what God might do in the midst of that. All right? Why don't we pray together?